we follow with a more practical, I might say, bottom-up approach, or one which, like, excuse me, Sabine Sousa's intervention this morning, is about what can be done outside government, because sometimes there's a huge gap that the government isn't filling. Whether it should or it shouldn't is another question. And again, it takes us outside of the UK and emphasizes the importance of transnational and international comparison, not just simply understanding what's going on in other countries because they impact on ours and reciprocally. I'm very happy that the founder and chief executive of Team Lease India, Manish Sabharwal, is with us from obviously the King's India Institute's partnership with us in the Cities Group. And he will speak about work skills in cities. Who is responsible? I don't have to tell you that the list of countries where job skills is a major issue is fairly long, and the list of countries where job skills is not a major issue, well, I'm not sure what that is.
Thank you. I've been listening all morning, and I'm from the private sector, and I don't know much about cities. But you know, the most interesting question for Indians like us is, why are countries poor? Right? I mean, the first question I asked myself when I went to the US for business school in '94 was, you know, these people aren't smarter than us. Why are they richer than us? Clearly. I asked that question in London off and on too. But, and so there are many reasons for poverty, right? We have many alibis in India. We have the weather, we have religion, we have the British, we have the Mughals, we have... But many of those explanations are sort of unsatisfying in the long run for people like us. And I think that the 5 transitions going on in India, farm to non-farm, rural to urban, informal to formal, subsistence self-employment to wage employment, and school to work. And these are really 5 journeys to a better life for most Indians, but they're not happening because of 3 problems. There's a matching problem, which is connecting demand to supply. There's a mismatch problem, which is repairing supply for demand. And there's a pipeline problem, which is preparing supply for demand. And I distinguish between repair and prepare based on the opening balance of the child or the duration of the course. But I'll quickly run through sort of those 3 issues. So the matching problem is really the employment problem, right? And we have and I'm going to speak from the Indian experience. We have a physical geography of work problem. We only have 50 cities with more than 1 million people. China has 350 cities with more than 1 million people. So we have 600,000 villages. 200,000 of those villages have less than 200 people. And so, and you know, every politician talks and dreams of taking jobs to people, but you may have to take people to jobs. I mean, at least on Chinese New Year, 300 million people get on a train and go home in February. We don't have that in India right now. We don't have mass migration at Christmas or Eid or Diwali or any other major festival you will take. So we haven't really taken people to jobs yet, and that's why we need a bunch of new cities. So if you think about the physical geography of work, it's still work in process. If you think about the sectoral geography of work, only 12% of India works in manufacturing, 50% of India works in agriculture, 50% of India is self-employed, and 90% of India is informally employed. And all 4 are a problem, right? 12% of the US is employed in manufacturing. It's absolutely silly. We may not catch up with China's 50% manufacturing, but 12% is clearly a wrong number. The 50% of our people on farms generate 15% of GDP. So India became the largest producer of milk in the world last year. We produced 120 million tons of milk, but 75 million people are involved in that process. The US produces 60 million tons of milk with 100,000 people. So these 75 million aren't employed. They're hanging out. I mean, more importantly, they're condemned to poverty because they're in low productivity. So if you think about matching, there's a physical geography of work, there's a sectoral geography of work, and in the context of India, there's an important labor legislation component of this, because labor legislation in India was written a long time ago. It's basic. An employment contract is marriage without divorce. Once you hire somebody, you can't get rid of them. Our benefits regime in the formal sector, you have to deduct 50% of payroll for low-skilled people. So that means that 100% of net job creation since 1991, even though there's been massive job creation, has happened in the informal sector. So 90% of India was informally employed in 1991. It's still 90%. And informality is a big problem. If I come to the skill problem or the mismatch problem, there is a market failure in skills. Employers are not willing to pay for training or candidates, but they're willing to pay for trained candidates. Candidates are not willing to pay for training, they're willing to pay for a job. Banks or microfinance aren't willing to lend to candidates unless the job is guaranteed. And training companies aren't able to fill up the classroom. So the innovation lies at the intersection of employment and employability. And it's a financing problem. It is who pays. And I think policymakers, we've been fighting for a long time, say, well, employers should manufacture their own employees. It's impossible for employers to manufacture their own employees, particularly in environments like India, where we already generate our own power, we provide our own transport, we provide our own water, provide our own security. It's highly unlikely that we'll be able to manufacture our own employees. And this linkage of this skill system to between what we teach in the skill system and what employers actually want, there's no shared framework. So we have something called national occupation codes, which just do a bad job of signaling to the technical training institutes of what employers want. So we're still teaching automobile engineering with a carburetor, no Indian cars made with a carburetor. But more importantly, let's get sophisticated. For feet on street financial services liabilities, Barclays pays me 30,000 a month and Bank of Baroda pays me 8,000 rupees a month for a kid. Or for retail floor supervisor, Bose will pay me 45,000 rupees a month while Reliance will pay me 10,000 rupees a month. This is a kid the same age, the job description is exactly the same. So what is the difference? Well, it could be body odor, it could be English, it could be sales skills. It is a different person, it's a different skill set, even though the kid is the same age and on paper may exactly have the same qualifications. So there's a 3 times, 4 times skill premium that has started emerging. And this shared framework can't be a one-time setup by skills. It has to be a self-healing framework because the world of work continuously changes. I think the geography of trainers is also a problem because every time I send my trainers to rural areas, they run away even though we give them a 50% skill premium. And technology has been a massive disappointment in education. I agree with the president of Stanford who recently said that all of us know technology matters in education, we just don't know how. And I think it's not replacing teachers, it's not working for first-generation learners, and it's definitely not working for skills. I mean, in the repair, prepare, and upgrade continuum, it probably works for upgrade. But in repair and prepare, it's not really working well. In the pipeline, or the third problem, which is, I think we've reconciled, we can't teach people in 6 months what they should have learned in 15 years. So recently I was talking about learning for earning, and the vice chancellor of the university got up and said, it's people like you who are screwing up education. Learning isn't for earning, learning is for living. I don't even know what that means, but there's this whole apartheid between the degree system and the diploma system in India, and I think it exists here. But all I was trying to say was I can teach somebody to be a salesperson or a barbender or a mason or electrician or a customer service person in 6 months. I can't teach them to be creative, curious, confident, risk-taker, team player. You had him for 15 years. Actually, that's what we're looking for. The last mile repair we would easily do and we can do, but we can't unteach them in 6 months what they should have learned in 15 years. In the education system, and this is a unique problem to India, but I think English is like Windows. It's an operating system. In a country where people speak 22 languages, employment outcomes are 300% higher for people who speak English, and now we're sort of struggling with this whole, more people speak English in India than they do in the US now, but we still have this whole notion of how do you get to bilingual, because that's labor mobility in a country where you have 22 or 25 languages, is English is sort of enabling of that. The education one, which is really the tension which India has because of the impossible trinity of cost, quality, and scale. 1 million kids will join the labor force every month for the next 20 years. So every month there will be 1 million new entrants to the labor force. That's our demographic dividend. So we obviously have to do things at quantity. But how do you maintain quality? And quantity, quality can be sort of contradictory objectives, right? You can be like Wharton or Harvard or maybe King's who have tight entry gates and wide open exit gates. Once you let them in, you let them out. Or you can be like the chartered accountant exam, where you have wide open entry gates and tight exit gates. 95% of the people fail. But vocational training in India, at least, has wide open entry gates and wide open exit gates. So the signaling value of certification is very important for matching for people like me. You know, I'm sort of at the agony and ecstasy of India's labor market, right? We've hired somebody every 5 minutes for the last 5 years. But we've only hired 5% of the kids who came to us for a job. So I had a job fair in Jaipur a few weeks ago. 35,000 people showed up. I met 800 of them. If they were born in Delhi, Bombay, or Bangalore, they would have had a job. Unfortunately, they were born in rural Rajasthan. So the two most important decisions a child in India makes are to choose your parents wisely and to choose your PIN code wisely. But if you think about the other extreme, I had a telecom client shouting at me a few days ago saying, you know, I've had 200 sales positions open, why haven't you filled them up? I said, well, I'm doing it for all your competitors. Your hiring standards are too high, we just can't find people. So he called me back at lunch and he said, okay, I need a pair of hands, I don't care if a brain comes attached. And if you reconcile those two sort of views, where we have these 35,000 people, or I get 50,000 people coming to me every month and I only hire 4,000 of them every month, and you have corporate India continuously lowering hiring standards to the point where it's now starting to affect productivity. So I think as an education system, cities are a very important part of that question of how many people will go to college. The world has a gross enrollment ratio of 25%. The US has 50. Gross enrollment ratio is the people between 18 and 55 going to college. The US has 55. India has 17. But how many people need to go to college? Are we going to be like Korea, where you have 65% GER, but you have 40% of taxi drivers with a college degree, or now 35% of people, retail sales clerks in the US, have a college degree now? Or are we going to be like Singapore, where 25% of the students in class 8, we have a partnership with the government of Singapore for our vocational training operation. 25% of the kids in class 8 get a letter from the government which says you can't go to college. You will be going to the vocational training system. It's not probably possible to do that in a country like India. So from my vantage point, which is really the infrastructure of opportunity in a country like India, is obviously we need to fix the roads and the power and the telecom, but the three E's of education, employment, and employability are really the infrastructure of opportunity. And why are we having such a huge difference between the size of the problem and the size of the solution in the last few years? I mean, one is the obvious problem which some people talked about in the morning. The government is organized vertically. The problem is a horizontal. So 18 ministries involved in skills. There's no Ministry of Employment. So the difference, I mean, the next wave of public policy impact doesn't lie in poetry. It lies in plumbing. It doesn't lie in political narratives. It lies in actual execution. And that's why probably 10 chief ministers are more important for India than one prime minister, and probably 10 mayors or real mayors are more important than 10 chief ministers. I think the question from today's perspective also, which I've been thinking all morning, is that villages have a unique place in India's political imagination. It's a dream that just won't die, and it has important consequences. The way it hasn't reached tipping point. For voters, for politicians, villages still move the needle in terms of where they get elected. So the issues sometimes tend to be averaged out, or tend to be cities tend to be policy orphans in any election campaign, any national one, of course, but even at the state level. And that is the question we haven't been able to answer for politicians, is what makes a city a job magnet? So they believe, oh, it's regulatory. So we had a city called Baddi where they gave 20-year tax exemption and everybody moved there. Now that the taxes are over, everybody's moving out. Or we had Chandigarh, Le Corbusier designed Chandigarh for us, which is great hardware, broad roads, and it's an economic wasteland. I mean, it just makes no difference. And why did places like Hyderabad, Bangalore, Pune, which are sort of the engines of economic energy, why did Bangalore become Bangalore? Was it because it was the first electrified city? Was it because there were thousands of schools and colleges? Was it because of the defense cluster? I don't think we've been able to answer the question for policymakers. But from our perspective in India, from the labor market now, employers care about nominal wages, while employees care about real wages. And in the last 5 years, because of the inflation we've had, because of cities running out, or the hyperinflation in the cost of living in one of these 50 engines of economic energy in India, it's very hard to move to them now. So migration has come down quite substantially in the last 5 years than it was in the 15 years before that. And that is where I think we're starting to see a little bit of cities, politicians and policies sort of owning up to cities. But from our vantage point, I mean, I did want to end with this. I wasn't sure whether to, but you know, there was some talk about green cities and green jobs and stuff like that, you know, and you know, India has the most green jobs and green cities in the world, because poverty is a very green job, agriculture is a very green job, and villages are very green cities. So I think you have to be sort of careful about that, at least from my vantage point, because you know, an unemployed, unemployable, or an uneducated Indian is not a free Indian, and we're not going to do that in rural India. If there's a new city out there which we can possibly adopt, emerging markets tend to skip the learning. We have a better cell phone system than you do. We didn't have a Y2K problem. But it's unclear to me that in cities we will take a very different trajectory just because of the cost of paying for new cities. You know, as Mr. Lister said, it's unclear who will pay for the new cities. It's not going to be planned in the way that, in fact, all the cities that we planned in India are economic wastelands, and all the ones which sort of just organically grew and just don't have in the power. We built the roads later, we've supplied them power later, we built the sewage later, are really the engines of economic energy. So from my sort of vantage point, you know, it's a unique time in India. You know, what's happening in India is not once in a decade or once in a millennium. It's really once in the lifetime of a country. Obviously, cities and labor markets are much more closely connected than most people think. But if there is a new city out there, or there's a different trajectory of building a new city, it's really unclear whether it's viable for most emerging economies to take that route. If it is possible, I think most of us would love that. So as of now, I think we're going to buy cars. We are going to do everything that the other cities did, because that's probably the only way that we'll answer the most interesting question, which is, you know, why is India poor? It's not because of its religion, weather, or anything else. It really is the cities and the 3 infrastructure of India. Thank you.